Welcome, Dr. Wendy Bostwick. I am thrilled to see you.
Hello, I'm thrilled to see you as well, even if mediated through a screen.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for spending some time talking about your expertise on bisexuality. Maybe you can just start out by telling us a little bit about how did you come to be an expert on bisexuality, and what are some things you've done related to bisexual advocacy? So you can start with what you're doing now and work backwards. You can start at the beginning and move forward, however you want to do it.
All right, great. Thank you, first of all, for just, saying that I am an expert. I thank you for that. I appreciate that. I've been doing work related generally to sexual and gender minority health for a really long time. I started out many years ago, over 25 years ago. I was first very interested in women's health writ large, reproductive and sexual health. So doing work around access, doing clinic defense, those sorts of things. And for me, health has always been deeply political. And so I think I really started as an activist and an advocate. And then I learned about this thing called public health, which was so exciting to me because I was like, oh my gosh, there's this thing that combines all the things that I'm interested in. It's a way to sort of understand the larger social and structural conditions that make people healthy or help to make people healthy, or the larger barriers that get in the way of people being healthy. And it was a way of thinking that acknowledged sexism and racism, as potential drivers. And obviously then, we started, and I was lucky to be started I think the first conversations related to how sexual orientation and sexual orientation discrimination was also part of that puzzle. So, like I said, I sort of moved from activism then more into the space of research, basically. So I got my master's in public health and community health sciences, and had a lot of really great experiences where I was part of a number of studies. I was really lucky to be at an institution where there were people doing research in the mid to late 90s related to sexual orientation and health outcomes, sort of either outside of or beyond the realm of HIV and AIDS. And sort of acknowledging the role of identity and how identity and experiences associated with identity can be drivers of health and well-being. So that's just a little bit about the way back, how it started. And once I was in grad school, I am a very curious person. I love to learn. And so I got a master's degree, a master's in public health. And I was like, I don't think I'm done yet. I think there's more that I want to do. And I really don't think I'm done yet, because surveying the landscape, and I'm like, so this is great. We're talking about lesbians. We're talking about gay men. That's all we're talking about.
You saw the gap.
I saw the gap, and, as is true for some of us, but not necessarily all of us, as a bisexual woman, I again looked around and I was like, where am I? I don't see myself in any of this. And so, it was sort of this compunction to make us visible. So my master's thesis was about bisexual women, and then my dissertation was about bisexual women's health. And that's sort of really where it started, just little, what I would consider almost baby steps, but I look back to when I was doing the master's and dissertation work, so 20 years ago, and I was like, oh, there's 5 articles, maybe, right, that talk about the unique experiences of bisexual women and health writ large, right? So not just sexual health, but behavioral health and mental health and physical health. And, you and I can attest to the fact today that there are more articles than I can count. So it's been amazing to bear witness to the expansion of, what we might reasonably call sort of a field of bisexual health research. And it's been really, a great sort of point of pride or honor or just larger gratitude in my life to have been able to contribute to that.
Oh, yeah, you've made such contributions. I mean, I feel like you're such a visionary, and your activism within the world of health research has been so important and really inspiring. And really, you've made such a difference. Can you tell us a little bit about the position that you're in now and the types of questions you're asking now, and the types of knowledge that you're generating?
Oh gosh. That was a lot of questions in one. So right now, I am working on a couple of different things as it relates to bisexual health, but in the past, 5 to 10 years, I've been particularly interested in the unique microaggressive experiences that bisexual people have. I mean, I think really interesting thing has happened where the literature and the language of microaggressions burst through to sort of mainstream media and mainstream sources. And so that's been really interesting to see, because I think a lot of people either experientially, probably most people that you and I know experientially, are like, oh yeah, microaggressions, I know what that is. I know what that looks like. But there was a real sort of dearth in the literature that really considered the uniqueness of our microaggressive experiences related to bi identity. So we're, one of a number of people at this point trying to really assert that there are some really specific microaggressions that bisexual people face, things that people are probably familiar with, but this notion that it's just a phase, or we can't decide, or that we're going to cheat on people, and trying to make that link that those sorts of stereotypes which get enacted through microaggressions are actually harmful. So really, and again, this is one of those realities of the work that we do. Standing on the outside, people are like, well, no, duh, that's harmful, but there's a need to actually empirically demonstrate that through rigorous scientific research. So that's what I'm doing with support from the NIH, looking at the health effects of microaggressions among bi women, and then also doing a study of bi-identified men, because bisexual identified men are incredibly still to this day marginalized and stigmatized and invisibilized, even more so than women. And also really trying to make sure that we expand the lens to account for multiple co-occurring identities. A lot of the literature up until really recently, to the extent that there was literature about bi-identified populations in health, it was overwhelmingly white. And there's all sorts of ways in which racial identity, ethnic identity, other identities, as we know, intersect in really important ways with sexual identity to make health experiences, lived experiences, familial experiences, all of those things look different. So really trying to tease that out and better account for that. And that's really been an emphasis of these last two studies as well, is ensuring that both samples were majority bisexual people of color.
That's fantastic. I love the work that you're doing. I love how you're attending to those voices that are on the margins, even on the margins of bisexual communities, which are already marginalized.
Yep.
There's something I wonder, because I notice that when I'm in bi community, I feel like it is some of the most diverse community that I am part of. And so as you're talking about that, I'm wondering both, just if you've got any reflections on that or observations about that. And then what are you finding in terms of these intersecting identities and How does that play out for bisexual people specifically?
So I think it'll be easier for me to speak to that sort of second question about what we're finding. And what I can say is, again, probably not terribly surprising, that for both by women and by men, although some of the sort of experiences might play out a little differently, nevertheless, there's definitely something going on in terms of how people experience their sexual identity at the intersection of what we sort of still call minority, racial, and ethnic identities in this country. So the ways, again, in which family is at play, but I also think, and this is, I think, more fresh in my mind because I just gave a talk about it. We did 31 qualitative interviews, face-to-face qualitative interviews with bi-identified men. Like 28 of the men were men of color. And particularly for Black bisexual men, the way in which notions of masculinity were at play, the ways in which they felt like, by virtue of their sexual identity and sexual attraction, that the stability of their masculinity was totally called into question. The ways in which, there have been a lot of really unfortunate racialized narratives around bisexuality, and your students, or this probably happened before many of your students were born, but you and I are very well aware of the narrative of the down low and how profoundly damaging that has been, even though, that book, whatever, came out 10, 15 years ago. The men that we talked to a year ago still talked about that. And they were like, that book came out and they made it seem like it was only, Black men that did this. That's not right. I can show you plenty of white men who are married with kids and they're doing this too. So what is this about? Why is it on my shoulders?
Right.
And, it gives me chills, right? It's like the ways in which these larger narratives really have enduring, lasting legacies in terms of people's own sense of themselves and their mental health. So, that's just one really salient example that's very fresh in my mind because, again, I just gave a talk about it. So there's just a lot there. And I would also say, the degree to which people's bisexual identity specifically is important to them. It's not always the case that it's really important for people. For a lot of people and a lot of the women that we spoke with, again, especially women of color, were like, it's part of me. Like, if you ask me, I'll tell you, but it's not really that important to me.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like we came out of a narrative that was like, this presumption, right, that a sexual identity was going to be your most salient identity, the most important identity that it could be. And everybody has to come out, and in all contexts, all the time. And we know that it's far, far, far more nuanced and complex than that. But again, especially this issue of like how important someone's bi identity is to them really varies quite a bit. And that's okay. It doesn't need to be your most important identity. It really doesn't. So those are things that sort of really stand out for me. But and there's a lot more there. But I'll stop with those two things.
Oh, that's fantastic. It seems like the kinds of questions you're asking now are getting at that nuance and that complexity. I feel like the earlier research, most of the earlier research on bisexuality and health focused mostly on HIV and men who have sex with men and women. And then the sort of what you're talking about, like the microaggressions piece coming in, saying, okay, well, what are some of the things that are contributing to health outcomes and to health disparities for bisexual people, and bringing in women also and looking at that, and looking at men, but not only in terms of sexual risk and all of that, and then looking at these intersecting identities. Like I can kind of see your thinking, like getting into more granular and complex kinds of ideas.
Yeah, for sure. And you had asked, I think as well, sort of other things that I'm looking at. And while I do think the context of minority stress, which I'm not sure if you'll talk about in your class or not.
Yes.
Okay. It is sort of relevant. It's not the only thing, right? That like, when we think about, especially when we think about health disparities, there are other sort of mechanisms at play. I mean, we know that bi people are more likely to experience childhood traumas. Why is that? What does that mean for later on in the life course? We know that bi people are more likely to live in poverty. Why is that? What's at play there? So I think there's a lot of sort of larger questions that we need to start digging into a little bit more. And, it's this notion of like beyond minority stress. And I'm not saying that we leave that totally out of the picture, but I don't think it explains all that it needs to explain. Yeah. And, what I would really love, and I still haven't quite figured out a way to do this, so maybe we can all do this together. I think, Tanya, I've probably said this to even you before, I think that there's a way in which conversations around bisexual identity, but very specifically like bisexual people and health outcomes could really be a lens through which we understand everyone's health. Right? So sort of moving beyond sort of siloed isn't exactly the word that I want to use, but sort of this very specific notion that it's always and only about bi people, and expanding the framework to say, no, there's all sorts of lessons here. There's all sorts of lessons from, the work that we do that we really need to put into. There are useful frameworks that can help us better understand everyone's health.
Oh, that's so great. It's actually sort of the theme of the class I'm teaching on bisexuality, is using bisexuality as a lens to understand relationships, to understand gender, to understand health disparities. So all of these different things, if we understand them through something as complex as bisexuality, then we understand, all the other people. I mean, you've been talking a lot about bisexual women and men, but we also know that trans people are more likely to be bi than cis people are. And so we're also bringing trans experiences into that if we're centering bisexuality. So that's great. I love that idea.
Yeah, well, and I love that that's part of what this class is about. That's so exciting. Maybe I'll just audit the class. How about that? I'm glad, and thank you for bringing up the experiences of trans and gender non-binary persons, because I think there's a real lack of information there, but it's really important to start having more expansive samples that include all genders in order to really better understand the experiences of TG, I say TG and B at this point, persons, because yes, as you said, trans populations are much more likely to sort of identify under the plurisexual umbrella. And we were really lucky in the qualitative interviews that we did with men that we had 7 trans men. And it was so, those interviews were very rich. And I think almost all trans men of color, in terms of the ways in which their own life trajectories revealed these just really, these complexities that of course we would expect to exist, but for some of our participants, having this perspective of what it was like to identify at one point in their lives, and this is their words, as a bi woman, and to now identify as a bi man.
Mm-hmm.
So just really rich. And again, going back to what we were saying before about, you know, bisexuality as a lens through which to understand the universality of our experiences. I think there's a lot to be said for the ways in which trans people's experiences at the intersection of gender and sexuality, gender presentation, sexual identity is really can be a very useful but also important lens for all of us to better understand gender and gender presentation and the way that that operates for all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It just disrupts the, you know, the hegemony around, you know, the way we think about gender. So yeah. So one of the things that I'm always so impressed with you is your savvy in terms of advocating for bisexuality within research realms. And within funding for research realms. And I'm wondering, is there anything you can share in terms of your insights for how to be an effective advocate within research or, you know, other kinds of structures, you know, within your own institution or within government or, you know, any of that?
That is a very interesting question. And again, I'm like, oh, am I savvy?
I say you are.
All right. Part of it, honestly, is about relationship building. I mean, quite honestly, it's about relationship building. In order to sort of have that as a basis for being able to maybe have challenging or hard conversations, but also to feel safe in having those conversations. That's not always going to be true. There are other routes that we can go in terms of advocacy, but mine has tended to be a bit more relational. So there's that, and it's really some of it's about timing, quite honestly. You know, I submitted an NIH grant focused just on, you know, bi identified women of color in 2005 when I just finished my PhD, I don't think it would have gotten funded.
Yeah,
I really don't. So I think it's also been about finding ways to make use of the data that already exists. You know, the probably my biggest contribution, quite honestly, was those analysis of, you know, a large national data set that already existed, but being able to say, okay, we're going to analyze sexual orientation and we're going to look at bisexual groups separately. We've been combining them for all this time, maybe because we had to for, you know, statistical reasons, but I think there are differences. Let's try to test this hypothesis. And lo and behold, there were pretty profound and significant differences. And so that happened, always standing on the shoulders of giants. That happened because there were people before us that advocated long and hard for the inclusion of sexual orientation measures in national studies, right? So, you know, the work of Judy Bradford, the work of Randy Sell, the work of Scout, you know, people who made that happen so I could make that research happen, you know. So, I mean, there's that reality too, that none of the work that we do happens in a vacuum. We're always, I hope in some fashion, benefiting from the hard work of the people that came before us.
Well, and I see you as somebody who really has that connection to other people who are doing the work, like in terms of appreciating the people who've come before, but also making space for other people. You know, you just did something recently where it was like you were asked to speak somewhere and that was a little foot in the door and you said, okay, but you've got to do more of this here. And I really see you using those platforms that you have so effectively. And I love that you're talking about relationship building, because, you know, in psychology, that's what it's all about. You know, it's all about the relationship. Everything in therapy, it turns out, is about the relationship, you know. So that is such a useful skill to have in all of those situations is the relationship building, and your insight about timing is so important as well in terms of thinking about what's the next step that the system might be ready for.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I mean, the next generations of bi-health researchers, which is what, like twofold, threefold, fourfold what we saw when we were starting out, because I absolutely think of us as contemporaries. I mean, it's astounding to see the work that they're doing, quite honestly. And in some ways, I'm sure their thinking is far more sophisticated about some things than mine. And I'm okay with that, right? It's not up to just me or just you to answer all of the questions. That is absolutely why we open doors and, bring people into the room, because I want as expansive and diverse of a field as possible.
Absolutely. And I really see persistence as being important too. You have been so persistent over such a long period of time.
Yes. I mean, depending on who you talk to, that's a asset or a deficit. But yeah, I was not a person who was like, okay, well, this bisexual thing doesn't have any money attached to it, so I'm going to go research something else entirely because it can get funded. That just wasn't how I approached it. Yeah. And that might be a little different maybe than other people, but that was me being true to me. And I mean, I think similarly, Tanya, the same is true for you. I mean, you've done so much foundational work in terms of bisexuality. When I talk about like the 5 papers that existed or whatever, the small literature, like 2 of those papers were yours. So, I mean, it's kind of fun to be able to have this conversation with you now and to sort of reflect back, but also to be so excited about where we're going, and I think it's important for your students to know about the NIH workshop that, we participated in, that I co-chaired with Dr. Brian Dodge, and that you were, of course, invited to, because it really means that it's on the radar screen. And what I sort of don't want to forget in the larger landscape of what we're talking about is, there's some pretty significant health inequities among bisexual populations. And we need some answers as to why that's the case. So I don't ever want to lose sight of that, there really, it is a little bit, in my mind, I tried to make the case that this is a public health emergency. Like, we need to be responding to this now.
Yeah. And the piece that I always think about with that is we need to know like what's causing this, and we need to know what we can do to make it better. Like that's always been the focus of my work. And I feel like all of that, not everybody's doing like both sides of that research. So where does it come from, what to do, but that's okay. And that's the thing that I really get from having conversations with you and other researchers, is it's like everybody's got their piece that they're contributing, and we're all contributing to this whole set of knowledge. And I thank you also, that workshop at NIH about bisexual health was so important, both in terms of the content and what came out of it. But honestly, just knowing that my tax dollars are going towards shining a light on bisexual health disparities and, figuring out what to do about it, that makes me feel super patriotic. It's like, yes, that's a really important thing. So let me ask you, with all of this knowledge and experience that you have, when you think about what bisexual people need, or bisexual community needs, in terms of resources, advocacy, what should people be turning their attention to that might make a difference in people's lives?
Well, I mean, part of it is the importance of, and this is so elemental, but part of it is when whether it's research spaces or social service agencies or social activities or whatever the space is, if you say LGBT, then mean it.
Mm.
You know, we've joked for a long time about the silent B and T. I've seen a tremendous, profound advancement in knowledge and awareness and inclusion of trans people all over the spectrum. I would really like to see that same sort of movement when it comes to bi people. Again, we make up the majority of the LGBT population. We are the majority. So we need to make sure that we are in all the rooms, including spaces where funding decisions are made. So, I mean, part of it, Tanya, is honestly structural, right? So ensuring that the systems and structures that provide us with resources are in fact inclusive and do in fact have representation, like that we are represented. I think that's part of it. I think on an interpersonal level, there's, you know, because I've certainly been asked, well, how do I advocate for bi people? Again, pretty elemental, like, don't laugh when somebody says they're bisexual. Like, don't commit the microaggressions that get committed all the time. Like, oh, are you sure? Like, you know, I think both you and I can speak sort of professionally and personally about how profoundly validating it is to be able to be in a space where you can say that you're bi without having people make jokes about it. You know, I still sort of brace, you know, for the, like, the microaggressive comments, if I'm really honest. It still happens to this day. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe people who aren't bi can be helpful in educating other people, other non-bi people about bisexuality, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Like committed allyship, right?
Yeah.
Do not let biphobia happen in your presence.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously don't commit it, but if you see it, you know, try to call it out, try to correct it.
In my class, one of the assignments is to create resources that are bi-affirming and accurate and all of this. And so, so students have created these, and I've been posting them to Project Rise social media because there's a competition now. So whichever one gets the most, gets the widest distribution, then that group of students gets extra points. So. And that's something that I realized, like, creating something that could be helpful and could make a difference. It's like educating people, like you don't have to be bisexual to help bisexual people and to help to advocate. So yeah, that's great. That's super guidance that you're offering in terms of what people can do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exciting. I'm gonna have to look into those projects and those resources. I love it.
Oh, great. Is there anything else you would want people to know about bisexuality or the work that you're doing?
Gosh, not necessarily. I mean, other than sort of what I just said in terms of being an ally. But I also, you know, I'm not going to speak for you, but for me, like, I do kind of want to be in a world, and I do see some shifts where ultimately this doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? Like, love who you want to love, be attracted to who you want to be attracted to, hook up, have sex with whomever you want to, however many people you want to. Like, I want it to not matter at the end of the day, right? I just want us to be able to be who we are, all of us. I just want us to be able to be who we are. Yeah. So that's, you know, that's my long-term goal. While I think it's important to acknowledge that there are problems, acknowledge how we address it, I think the broader vision is one where it doesn't ultimately matter that I'm bisexual.
Yeah, I think my take is, like, once we get to the point where there's no microaggressions and health disparities and discrimination, then we'll, like, assess. Then we'll be like, okay, well, do we want it to matter now, or do we want it just to not matter? But, you know, I think I'll need that perspective as soon as we get there.
Yeah, no. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I hear that. Yeah.
So if folks are interested in your work, are there ways that they can follow you? Give us your title and institution, and like any other information you want about how people can find you.
Sure. I'm not a huge fan of social media, so the best way to find me is to email me. So I am currently an associate professor and associate department head at the University of Illinois at Chicago. I'm in a college of nursing, but as I noted, my degrees are in public health, and my email address is wbostw1@uic.edu, which you can feel free to share with students. I am, one of the most gratifying experiences, if I'm honest, is to have students email me, that I don't know, but that are like, I read your work and, I'm really interested in this. Can I talk to you? I love having those conversations. Yeah. I love having those conversations. So yes, if any questions, or if you want actually access to any of my published articles or anything like that, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. The only caveat, I do get a lot of emails. So sometimes, going back to that thing about persistence, you may need to email me once or twice. But, having said that, yeah, I love talking to students about the work that I do.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, like right now, but also your time over decades doing this work and making these contributions. You truly are like a star, and you've made such a difference. Oh, you want to talk about your t-shirt?
I do want to, I want everyone to see my bi unicorn. It's like my favorite t-shirt. Yeah, it's what else can I say? I'm into the unicorns and all bi colors. So
fantastic. Me too. I love to dress like the bi flag.
Yes,
so
I know you do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a delight.
Thank you, Tanya. And thank you, actually, for all of your work. I don't think we could do this without each other.
Yeah, no question.
Thank you.